in Silicon Valley, there's this view that if you raise money, that's a big badge of honor. Crunch is filled with announcements of companies that have raised money at big valuations, and people are like, "Oh, look at me!" And when someone hits a revenue model, most companies don't disclose that, so it doesn't get publicity. But just raising money is not. It's not the great achievement that you think it is. It just isn't. And if I could start a business without raising any money from outside investors, I would do that first thing. It's much better and more valuable to kind of build your own business, bootstrap it for as long as you can, um, you know, prove the model that you have a product or service someone likes and you have customers that'll provide revenue. That's much more important than raising money from investors and, getting your name in TechCrunch.
Everybody, welcome to the Gildre Spotlight podcast. Today we have a very exciting guest, kind of one of the pioneers of the app ticketing industry. His name is Chris Tsakalakis, the former CEO of StubHub, current venture partner at Starhawk Ventures. But Chris, if you can give our audience a quick introduction of yourself, that'd be fantastic.
Sure. I'll try to make it brief. I am currently a venture partner at Starhawk Ventures, as you mentioned. I also do consulting work and advising work with technology CEOs. But most of that is based on my experience as an operator. So for the last 30 or so years, I've been working in the internet industry. As you mentioned, I was the president and CEO at StubHub, the online ticket marketplace. Prior to that, I worked at eBay as a vice president. After StubHub, I ran a startup called Vivino, which is a wine app that allows you to take a photo of a wine label, and then the app will tell you how users rate that particular wine. And then last thing I did as an operator was the CEO of Kiva, which is a crowdfunding platform for microloans. So it's a nonprofit that allows you as an individual to give out loans $25 at a time to lenders around the world in over 70 countries. And the similarity among those four companies, eBay, StubHub, Vivino, and Kiva, is that they all had a marketplace mechanism where you matched buyers to sellers, or in the case of Kiva, borrowers to lenders.
So all sounds B2C as well.
Yeah, and yes, exactly. They were all B2C. Essentially, we were a business that allowed individuals to sell to, or in the case, get loans from Kiva, individuals.
Very cool. And, kind of to the start of maybe your career, end of your adolescence, when you're younger, did you always want to dive into being an operator of these big B2C organizations with millions of users? Or what did you originally want to be like when you were growing up?
I don't think I ever had a concept in my head that I wanted to be the CEO of a company that had millions of customers. I never kind of thought of it that way. I did have the example given to me of being an entrepreneur. My dad was one. He was an electrical contractor who had his own business. Then he started a general construction business. Then he did real estate development. And being an immigrant from Greece, he and his siblings and sisters-in-law were entrepreneurs as well. Like a lot of Greeks, they had restaurants. So I had two uncles and an aunt who had a fast food restaurant and a regular sit-down restaurant. So I had that example in front of me. I guess I had this sense that I like the idea of working in business. I like building things. Since I worked for my dad from the age of 12 to 20, working in construction. So I had those ideas of things I liked, but I don't think I ever sat down when I was even in college thinking like, oh, I'm going to run a big company.
And I think just going back to your family's background, Greek, they say a lot of the best business folks are of Greek descent, but restaurant business is one of the hardest businesses to jump into. Did you learn anything from your family's restaurant businesses?
Yeah, mostly not to do it. I only worked part-time for, I had an aunt and uncle who they owned a fast food restaurant. And when they first opened, they needed some help. So I literally made fries and got the drinks together and then pushed the order out on the counter. But I only did that a few times. And it's hard work. It's a lot of hard work. In college, I worked for Penn Catering, where we catered events on campus and off campus. And that's also a lot of hard work, hard physical work. But I was no stranger to that through construction. I kind of learned once I had my first internships in college where I could wear a suit and go into an air conditioned office. I learned that it was probably nicer to do that than to have to do manual labor.
Right. I think when you're younger working manual labor, it teaches us that ultimately we want to use our brains and build something bigger, because it does teach a lot of grit and hard work. And I think a lot of folks, fit that specific role. But um, going back to your journey at Penn, what did you study at Penn and why?
Well, when I applied to Penn, unlike the other six colleges I applied to, I knew that Penn was known for Wharton for the business school. And so I applied to that program. I think I applied to a business program at the University of Illinois, but everywhere else I said I was going to be a psychology major because I was interested in just understanding how people think and do things. Um, so it was a little bit of a fluke. I mean, initially I got something sent in the mail because I was a student in the 80s before the internet, and it was from the University of Pennsylvania. And I had lots of things sent to me in the mail from different colleges. And it was a head scratcher to me growing up in the suburbs of Chicago. Why is this state school from Pennsylvania sending me this thing? And I mentioned it to a friend of mine. He's like, no, Penn isn't a state school. It's a private university. It's part of the Ivy League. I didn't even know that. I mean, I had an ambition to go to school in the Ivy League, but I knew nothing about what schools were actually in the Ivy League beyond Harvard, Yale, and maybe Princeton. And so and then my friend said, and they're known for their business school, the undergraduate business school is supposed to be the best business school in the country. So because of that, because of my friend, Bill Houlihan, I applied to Penn and I applied to the Wharton program, not knowing that it was harder to get into, not knowing, I mean, I didn't know anything. That's just where I applied.
That's amazing. And I know I think that's the best business school and at least I think in the world, right? Wharton School of Business.
I think for undergrad, it's still considered one of the top business schools. If you look at the rankings for business schools for actual MBA degrees, it's certainly in the top 5.
Did you learn anything, in particular in undergraduate that sets you up for success for your future?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the Wharton program is a pretty rigorous undergraduate business program. Most of the classes we take are also the classes that MBA students take. In some cases, we as undergrads sat in the same classes in the same physical space as graduate students. In other cases, you'd have the same teacher teaching an undergraduate section and a graduate section. So it was pretty rigorous, but it was, half of the courses that I took. The other half were distribution requirements, more liberal arts classes to make me a more well-rounded human being. But I took an introduction to legal class that still is helpful to me. My wife is from England and she doesn't quite understand what standing means in legal setting. That was something I learned as I think a sophomore at Wharton. But you learn basic accounting, management. So all of the basics you need uh, for to work in business, I learned at Penn at Wharton undergrad. I also I had to take a decision science class, is what they called it. And it was essentially an introduction to Excel class. Again, I graduated in 1989. It's a long time ago, but we used Excel on the Mac. It was, what you see is what you get. Looks pretty much like it does today without color. And I learned macros and a bunch of other things, how to use Excel. So when I got to Bain after I graduated, I didn't have to learn how to use Lotus 123. There are a lot of things that I already knew that my fellow analysts have had to learn in training.
And so at Bain, how did that opportunity? I'm assuming a lot of Wharton graduates, Bain consultant comes to your, on campus and recruits directly. Is that how you found that opportunity?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when I started as a freshman, or even I would say into my junior year, I had no clue of even the concept of management consulting, let alone Bain and Company, McKinsey, BCG. And all of those firms came to the Penn campus, and a lot of them specifically recruit Wharton students. The whole environment, the job search environment back then is radically different than it is now. I have kids in college, and I talk to a college kid a week. So the experience today is completely different. Back then, it was a real advantage being on an Ivy League campus because Bain only recruited at certain places. They had to physically go to places to recruit, and they had a pretty short list. So unless you knew about Bain and sent them a resume, you were unlikely to get an interview. And for me, all I had to do was go into the Penn Career Center, leave my resume in a slot for whatever company was recruiting, and then wait to see if I get selected for an interview or not. And I got 80 first round interviews that way, 80. Yeah, a lot of first round interviews.
That's incredible. So you mentioned you graduated in 89 and you have kids in university right now. How I think just with the internet, you'd think it'd be maybe easier to find opportunities out there, but right now it's just a crunch for a lot of recent college grads finding opportunities out there. How do you think, what was it because you were at Wharton, so many opportunities came to you, you dropped off your resume, or was it because kind of just the times are different?
It's both. I mean, because I was at Wharton, because I was at Penn, companies came to us, and again, they limited the number of candidates that they considered. Today, every university uses Handshake as a platform for jobs, and that means that any student at any university can apply to any job. And as a result, it's relatively easy to apply to hundreds of jobs. I know lots of college kids who applied literally to hundreds, 200, 300 jobs. It's easy to send in an application. You know, your resume and everything is already set up in Handshake. But to actually get an interview is very difficult. Again, I know people who've applied for hundreds of jobs and they hear from zero, no one, not even you're rejected. They just don't hear from them at all. So it's never been easier to apply for a job, either as a student or as a someone working later in their life. But as a result, the companies are overwhelmed with resumes coming in, and they have to use automated tools, AI tools, to filter out all the resumes coming in to look for keywords and that type of thing. So you have to really struggle and do a lot of extra work to get your resume to the top of that pile. And that's where networking and other elements come in. And those are the types of things that I talk to college students about, how to network and ways that I can help them network.
How do you think networking is different today than it was back before the internet?
Well, it's easier. I think it's much easier to meet people today than it was in the past. Again, in the past, it was all based on physical proximity. So if I wanted to talk to a Wharton alumnus when I was at Penn, I would have to look them up in some directory. I wouldn't even know where to look for one. There might be one in the Career Center. Then I would have to either send them a letter, the ones with the stamp on them, or call them and have a 20% chance of actually catching them on the phone. Now you don't even need the school to find alumni of your particular university. You can do that on LinkedIn, and you can contact people via LinkedIn. All the schools have directories where you can find potential mentors. I'm on the Penn directory because that's where I went. My older son is at Cornell, and I've listed myself as a mentor in the Cornell directory also, and it has my full background the way it would on LinkedIn. But students can search for particular areas like consulting or venture capital that they're interested in, and they might be able to find me. And that's often how they, find me. I'm only in these two networks for Cornell and Penn. And again, I talk to a college student about one a week on average.
That's
Yeah.
amazing, I think.
So it's very easy to kind of meet people and interact and have these types of interactions, do it via Zoom. I mean, even when I left StubHub, I did a lot of networking, and almost all of that was in person. Uh, and that was 2014. I mean, it wasn't that long ago. Okay, granted, it was 11 years ago, but still, if you wanted to meet someone, they're like, come to the office. It wasn't, let's do a video call. That almost never happened.
Yeah, it's amazing how just a couple things have changed, I guess, since the pandemic time, I would say. Everyone going remote and then just the boom of AI, those two things intersecting with each other. It's been interesting seeing the job market and work life in general change. But kind of back to your career, uh, what was the pivotal moment that made you want to switch from advising companies at Bain to actually building them?
I think it kind of happened early on. I like the intellectual stimulation of working at Bain. The like management consulting business is really about solving business problems. And part of that is understanding what the business problem is and then using data, using analysis to solve the business problem. And that was interesting intellectually to me. But after a while, it started to feel like an academic exercise because you could make recommendations to your clients, but whether or not they followed them and whether or not they were successful, that was up to them, not up to you. And that became increasingly frustrating for me. I also got a glimpse of what it was like to work in a more entrepreneurial environment when I worked in Eastern Europe. So I spent 3 years in Bain, Boston, working with U.S. clients. Got bored of that. Had friends working in Warsaw doing privatization work, and I said, "Hey, I want to do that." So I transferred to the Bain London office. Got sent to a project in Warsaw, and when I got there, there were 3 people in the office versus the 700 who were in Bain, Boston. And one of the first things I had to do with a colleague who became a very close friend was go to IKEA and buy a couple of desks because they didn't have desks for us. So that was what it was. That was my first kind of glimpse of what it was like to do a startup in a professional environment, and that was more fun. And you had to be creative about getting stuff done. We didn't have a lot of infrastructure supporting us. When we did slides, we couldn't just project with PowerPoint. We had to draw them out and then fax them to the London office, and then they would fax them back. I mean, the whole thing logistically was a huge pain in the butt, but it also forced you to be creative about overcoming obstacles. And that became more interesting to me than the actual work. Um, so I did that for about a year and a half in Warsaw, and then in Russia, working in a more entrepreneurial environment, albeit for Bain and Company. And then when I went back to London, I was like, oh, yes, this is consulting again, only now it's not US clients, it's UK clients, which are even less interesting than US corporate clients. And after a while, I was like, okay, I've had enough of this. Like, I want to do something new. And so there was this notion that I'd rather do something and get my hands dirty and build something than just sit back and advise. And the other notion was, I read this book called What Color is Your Parachute to figure out like what industry do I want to go into? And the book, which I think is still around, had you do a bunch of exercises, but I kind of came to the conclusion I really liked business to consumer businesses. I liked marketing and kind of product development, and I liked technology. And this all happened in the summer of '95, and that was when Netscape went public. Netscape was the first internet browser before Google Chrome and Safari and Internet Explorer. There was Netscape. That's where Mark Andreessen was the person who helped develop Netscape. Mark, of course, is a pretty famous venture capitalist now. And that company went public in the summer of '95. And I was like, what is this about? And I started looking at and researching the internet and got really interested and excited about the internet and what the internet could do. And again, in '95, I would tell people I'm really interested in working in the internet. My friends, my English friends would say, oh yes, the internet. I need to check that out. Like people had heard of it, but they hadn't used the internet. No one would have been on the web. At most, they were using CC mail, which was email, but only internally at your company. So it was a very early time in the internet space. But I saw something that I saw that this could be very big, and I got excited about
Wow. And why did you decide B2C, direct business to consumer businesses over? It seems like everyone now in the tech space love B2B SaaS because it's predictable revenue, higher ticket sizes. Why did you decide to go the business to consumer route?
Well, it was my personal interest. I didn't look at it as what is the best business model for a company. People like B2B SaaS because of the way the economics work. You can target a relatively small number of customers. If you have a product where you charge a subscription or an annual fee, then you build revenue over time. And that's easier than a transaction related business where you have to basically get your revenue every single day. I liken it to, a transaction business is where you have to go out and fish every day and find your fish. And a subscription based business is you're basically raising fish in a farm. So two different approaches. You still eat, but it's easier to eat from the farm than it is to try to go out and catch in the wild every day.
Mhm.
Um, so my interest was personal. I just could relate to being a consumer. I had more empathy for the customer and a better understanding of what it was. So it was as simple as that. I did work on businesses like we had Baxter Healthcare as a client, and they sold to hospitals. So it was a B2B business. It just wasn't as interesting to me intellectually, just from a gut standpoint. It just wasn't as interesting. So that was the reason I wanted to pursue that. And there was plenty of B2C going on at the time. It wasn't like uh, the B2C companies weren't getting any funding. This is in the time of when Amazon was starting, when eBay was starting. Um, Google hadn't even started yet. Yahoo went public in 96. Those were, for the most part, all B2C businesses. So it was the kind of majority of businesses um, working on the internet. And the B2B businesses were more like Microsoft or hardcore hardware where I didn't have experience. Everything was new in the internet, so I didn't really need experience. No one had experience.
It's amazing kind of talking about those early on technology companies that are B2C companies like Apple, Amazon. They're, within about a time frame of 10 or 15 years, they went from, $0 to multi-billion, if not trillions of dollars in market cap valuation, compared to kind of the older traditional industries of oil, which, it took years and years to become billion-dollar industries.
Yeah, but even Apple, Steve Jobs left Apple in the 80s, and Scully came in to run the company. He'd come from Pepsi. That happened when I was in college. I remember it. And I bought an Apple Macintosh, one of the originals, from from the bookstore at Penn. It was my first computer. Um, by the time I got to the Valley, Apple was not doing well. Like, the Worldwide Developer Conference was one that people went to for years and years. But by the time I started my first company, it had really fallen off. And that was even after Steve Jobs had come back. So if you look at the history of Apple, yes, certainly it's worth trillions of dollars today. But a lot of that value has been added in the Tim Cook era, where the volume has really gone way up. And there were many ups and downs in Apple's history, especially when Steve Jobs wasn't there. It wasn't a straight line.
Right. It seems like Apple, ultimately, since smartphones came out in 2008, that's kind of when the iPhone came out, that's really their bread and butter.
Yeah, and it's the preponderance of their profit, absolutely. But again, the iPhone came out in 2007. I think Apple was created in the 70s.
Oh, right, right.
Yeah,
Well, Google, for example, and a lot of other, just even a lot of these YC companies that were like Airbnb and a lot of these other ones, in just a matter of years, they became billion-dollar companies, which is just incredible to think about compared to, I mean, just industries back, you know, in the early 20th century. But
yeah. I mean, one dynamic is for internet-led businesses, the number of people using the internet, the percentage of the population using the internet, has gone way up since '96. Since those days where my friends had to check it out because they hadn't checked it out. In the early days of the internet, even buying something online was less likely. Even if you were on the internet, you were more likely to buy on the internet if you had been on the internet for several years. So the amount of time you'd spent using the internet would increase the trust you had in actually buying something online. But that was a novelty. And what I saw in the pandemic is there are lots of businesses that were still not online. Like they finally, the pandemic in 2020, that was 5 years ago. Okay, I've been here since '96. Um, in 2020, there are businesses that are like, I really should set up an online store. I'm like, you think? So the the basic capability that these companies have, like Airbnb, is they're riding on this foundation of such a large number of people using the internet. And in the case of Airbnb and Uber and the others that kind of launched around 2008, it was they're riding on mobile also.
right.
Because the use of mobile has greatly increased the number of people who use the internet.
Do you think, because I guess it took, I guess, 12 years, 15 years for people to adopt the internet and trust it to kind of use it in their daily lives to order an Uber, to buy specific products on Amazon. Now it seems like AI came out in November 2022. So it's been around 2.5, 3 years. It seems like the whole world has adopted AI, whether you're traveling. I've been down in Latin America. People in parts of Latin America understand AI. All over the world have adopted AI in such a an incredibly fast way. So just why do you think AI has been adopted? Is just kind of on the route, building from people adapting to the internet, or is it something else?
Well, I think it's a step change in capability. So not to be pedantic, but AI has been around for a long time. I had a college roommate my freshman year who did his thesis in artificial intelligence. Okay. So that was he graduated in 1986.
I should say the capabilities of how AI are really boomed when ChatGPT took off in November.
Yeah. So ChatGPT really took off in November of 23.
Or 23.
And that was, generative AI based on large language models. So there's been AI and people have been working on AI in the Valley for decades. But the the ability for artificial intelligence to generate content, text, images, video, but it started with text. And for them to do it based on these large language models, that was really a step change. Like you had AI being used to do Google Translate as an example. Google always used that as an example of how they used artificial intelligence, but that was years ago. This was I give you some information and you give me a bunch of stuff. And that's not what AI did before. Before they were doing sorting, they were image recognition, the facial recognition that Google Photos does. That's all AI is also. But it went from just pattern matching and machine learning to generating content. And that was the big step change. I think once people saw that and what it could do, they then saw a much broader applicability to artificial intelligence. Oh, this can help me write a paper. Oh, this can help me write a summary, or I can write a speech, or whatever it is. And I think that's the reason it's really taken off.
Kind of democratize creativity in a sense.
Or completely ruined creativity, depending on how you look at it.
Right.
Well, I think it's probably democratized creation of content, not necessarily the creativity required to create the content.
Right. For me, I've enjoyed, for example, these podcasts are recorded on Riverside. I take the transcript and turn it into a blog. 5 years ago, I would have had to listen to the podcast. It'd take, 7 to 10 hours to create a blog. And now it takes a little less than an hour to create these blogs. So I think it's saving a lot of time. But I do agree that a lot of people are just not using their head enough and on social media and using AI to do every single component of their job. And there has to be a justifiable balance with it.
Yeah. And there's some of the stuff that's created is slop. My son is also a Wharton undergrad. And he is the co-founder of the AI Business Club at Wharton. But he also has an issue with AI slop and how it's ruining creativity. So he's written about it on his blog. So there is this, we'll see how this all sorts out. The internet was used for a lot of things early on and still used for a lot of things. But after a while, you start to see what really works. And we're still in this stage where the capabilities of generative artificial intelligence are still being built. We haven't tapped out yet, despite the fact that people think GPT-5, it wasn't as big a leap as from GPT-4 as on the previous iteration. We haven't tapped out yet. Like there are still advancements happening on average every 3 weeks in artificial intelligence. And I think people are still figuring out how to use what was developed 3 weeks ago. So that process will continue for a while. There's still a rapid amount of change in the artificial intelligence space.
How has Wharton School of Business changed from, the time you went to now the time your son is going? I'm assuming a lot more AI conversations, a lot more classes on artificial intelligence.
Yeah, Wharton and Penn are trying to be at the forefront of artificial intelligence. So there's an AI major, both in engineering and in the Wharton Business School as a concentration. There are professors who specialize in AI. There are professors who had been specialists in data and data analytics who are now AI professors. So there's a lot being done there, but I think the bottom line is the teaching is still done between a professor and a group of students. And I would say the core curriculum is more or less the same as it was as when I took it. So in some ways, things are very similar to the way they were 36 years ago. And in other ways, the focus on AI, the fact that as a Wharton undergrad, everyone gets the same degree. So Donald Trump, Elon Musk, and I all have the same degree from Penn, a BS in economics, but you pick a concentration, and there are like 25 concentrations. One of them is in artificial intelligence within the Wharton School.
What was your concentration?
Mine were real estate and entrepreneurial management.
Interesting.
So I picked real estate because of my dad's experience in real estate, and I thought it was something I could relate to. And again, entrepreneurial management, this idea that you could apply a broad set of skills to something. I didn't want to specialize in just finance or accounting or something like that. I wanted to still be at a higher level to kind of look across disciplines within the business realm.
That sounds. I wonder if they have emphasis in like philosophy as well, like economics and philosophy or economics and politics.
Well, within the Wharton School, no, there isn't a concentration on philosophy, but Penn is one of maybe 50 universities in the United States that have a politics, philosophy, and economics major. And that PPE major, as it's called, was first developed at Oxford in the 1920s. And it's very prevalent in the UK, but in the US, we have thousands of universities in the US, like 3,000 or more accredited universities in the US, and there are only 50 that have that program.
Well, going back to your career at StubHub, you grew ticket sales from about 400 million to 3.2 billion in 8 years. What were kind of some of the strategic critical decisions you made to unlock that massive growth?
Well, just to be very clear, I didn't do it by myself. I happened to be leading a company and a group of people, hundreds of people who we did that together. So that growth came from a couple of things. One was very aggressive marketing. We spent more on marketing, and we were more aggressive about bringing consumers to the site than our competitors, partially because we had a better conversion rate. So the likelihood of a visitor coming to StubHub to actually purchase the ticket was higher than our competitors. And that was because we had a better product and a better product experience. You could pick where you wanted to sit in the stadium. We had an interactive seat map. We were one of the first people to do that. And that allowed us to increase conversion, which meant we could spend more money on marketing, because a visitor coming to our site was worth more than a visitor going to our competitor's site, because we were more likely to convert them into a buyer. So that was one element, marketing. The other element was the product and the customer experience. So I talked a little bit about the interactive seat maps. One of the things we did very religiously was focus on customer satisfaction and improving our buyer satisfaction. So through surveys and feedback, we understood what was annoying potential buyers and actual buyers, and we did a lot of work to improve those things. One of the biggest things we did to improve the product experience was to provide tickets electronically. When I started at StubHub, 80% of our tickets were delivered physically via FedEx, or you would come into one of our 9 locations around the US and pick up tickets just before an event. By the time I left, we had 80% of our tickets being delivered electronically. So it went from 80% physical to 80% electronic over the course of the time that I was there. And electronic delivery meant when you bought your tickets, you got them right away. So you didn't have to worry about would they show up on time. If you're selling the tickets, you didn't have to deal with the hassle of FedEx and putting things in a FedEx label and going to the FedEx office or the UPS office. That improved satisfaction a lot. It reduced the cost of customer service. Less people contacted us. So those are major elements. And then the third element was we did a bunch of integrations, partnerships. Our biggest one was with Major League Baseball. So that created a more integrated experience with, again, higher satisfaction, more electronic delivery. All of our tickets for baseball were delivered electronically. But we had similar integrations with college sports, University of Michigan, University of Texas, most of the big college sports teams became partners of ours. So those are all factors in growing the business.
That's amazing. And just for a lot of, aspiring entrepreneurs or tech CEOs, and what was an average day as the CEO of StubHub? What did that look like?
I don't know if there was an average day. I mean, most days I would work out in the morning, go into the office. Um, I would reply to email, have a series of meetings. Those meetings could be one-to-ones with my direct reports. They could be with people lower in the organization who I was trying to mentor. It could be with teams who were doing a quarterly review and wanted me to sit in on it. I also had, because StubHub was a subsidiary of eBay, I also had meetings with my eBay colleagues, people running other parts of eBay, eBay US, eBay North America. Um, so it really depended, but in general, it was a lot of meetings. Whenever you work in a large corporation, that's what you end up doing. But the meetings could be about a variety of things. It could be reviewing our latest advertising campaign. It could be looking at our financials for the quarter. It could be setting our projections for the next year. It could be dealing with an HR issue. Someone did something they shouldn't have. Um, it could be all of those things.
So just having such a busy day, it sounds like you wake up early and you probably get to bed late. How do you stay optimal throughout your day? Do you have a specific routine?
Well, the one thing I try to do religiously was eat regular meals. I'm not a big fan of skipping meals. I did have when I was at Bain, had a boss who asked me to do a bunch of stuff, and I said, "Okay, I'll do that after lunch." And he looked at me. He's like, "Lunch is for wimps," and I'm like, "No, I'm going to have lunch." Um, so I've always tried to take care of myself physically. That's why the workouts I did them early in the morning so that I could still get into the office by 8:30 or 9. But something to keep my mental state in check was to make sure I was doing something physically taxing, because sitting or standing at a desk doesn't do that for you. And then when the day ended, I would leave the office and make sure I'd get home in time to see my kids when they were growing up.
Got it. It
Now
sounds
they don't care if I show up, but back then they did care.
well, that sounds like a fantastic day. And yeah, I mean, so I have a couple more questions for you. Yeah. So just as far as building a team, because I know this is a kind of a critical factor for a lot of our members here at Gildre, finding teammates. What are kind of like key things that you see when you're finding like partners when you're building a company?
There are a couple of factors, and I had a discussion about this topic yesterday with the CEO. First is you want to find the right person at the right time in their career and the right time for the company. There are people who are fantastic leaders, but for a startup, they would be the wrong leader and vice versa. So you just want to find someone who's right for the company at that time. But more broadly, um, I think of it, anyone reporting to me in the leadership team, I thought of them having two specific skills. One was the ability to do their job, that particular area. So if they're going to be the chief technology officer or the head of marketing, someone who's really, really seasoned and experienced in running, say, a marketing team, if they're going to be a chief marketing officer. And someone so experienced and driven that they're going to come to me with ideas of what they want to do, so that I'm not constantly telling them, I think you should do this. I think you should do that. Have you thought about this type of advertising or that type of advertising? I mean, I have those ideas, but if I'm the one who has the ideas and I'm pushing them to marketing, I have the wrong person running marketing. The marketing person has to come to me and push my thinking, or whatever, the general counsel, the chief technology officer, they need to push my thinking. So I want people who are going to think more broadly than I am about their particular role, and who are going to push my thinking. The second is, and this is a little in line with the first, beyond being an expert in their field, someone who can think strategically about the whole business, so that again they can push my thinking. I want the leadership team of any company I lead to be people I can sit around the table. We can all discuss where the company should be going, large strategic decisions, and everyone has a point of view. and can provide their input. That doesn't mean we all decide on a consensus basis, but it means that I get very valuable input before a decision is made. Either a decision is made by vote or consensus, or I decide. And I try to tell people ahead of time how a decision is being made. But those are the two things: someone who can think strategically and broadly about the whole business, and someone who's an expert in their particular field who can really drive the agenda there more than I ever will be able to.
That's fantastic advice. And another thing for those that are more early on in their careers, um, you've worked at huge organizations. If you've led huge organizations. What's one thing of advice, one word of advice that you'd say for those early on in their career to work their way up the ladder? Like what's kind of the fastest way to work your way up that ladder to be a leader in some of these organizations?
I don't know that there's one way, but I would summarize by saying be valuable. So do your best to be valuable for the company, solve problems, be the person who figures it out, do things that make your boss's life easier. That was the first piece of advice I got when I joined Bain. Your job is to make your boss's job easier. So don't just do as you're told or whatever you've been given or wait for something to be told. Be proactive and be valuable, solve problems and get things done. And the people who are proactive in the work that they do rather than reactive, like I just do what they tell me, those are the people who go much further ahead. What I encountered at both Vivino and Kiva is a mindset, especially among younger people, that, hey, I've been here 2 years, I should get promoted. And I'm here to tell you that's not at all the case. No one gets promoted just because they time served. This isn't a prison. You're not working at a prison. This is an exchange of ideas. And the people who move more quickly in their careers are the ones who provide more value over a period of time. So think about how much value you accumulate for the company. And once you reach that point, then you can be promoted. But that's not based on a timeline. It's based on how much effort you put into it every day.
Love that. Make yourself stick out, add value. And then on top of that, just for our founders listening, what would you tell, any word of advice to early stage founders?
Be patient, be persistent. I think the main thing that I try to tell founders is, because whenever I work with founders, they're always looking for money. Not necessarily from me, but they're looking for money. Either they're trying to increase revenue or get their first revenue or find investors who will invest in the business. And what I try to tell them is the best money you can get is from your customers. That's called revenue. Investors take a long time to find, are a pain in the ass to deal with, frankly. And I can say that as an investor myself. They're not the ones who are going to validate whether or not your business is valuable. Customers will validate your business. They're the only ones that matter. If you have customers and revenue, then it's easy to get money from investors. If you don't, it's almost impossible. So the main focus has to be on getting revenue from customers. And in order to do that, you need to build out a product or a service that customers value. And you need to have the right product and service. You need to have the right go-to-market strategy or sales model, whatever you want to call it. That's much more important than getting money from investors. And the last piece of it is in Silicon Valley, there's this view that if you raise money, that's a big badge of honor. TechCrunch is filled with announcements of companies that have raised money at big valuations, and people are like, oh, look at me. And when someone hits a revenue model, most companies don't disclose that, so it doesn't get publicity. But just raising money is not, it's not the great achievement that you think it is. It just isn't. And if I could start a business without raising any money from outside investors, I would do that first thing. It's much better and more valuable to kind of build your own business, bootstrap it for as long as you can, prove the model that you have a product or service someone likes and you have customers that'll provide revenue. That's much more important than raising money from investors and, getting your name in TechCrunch.
I love that advice. I think bootstrapping is not talked about enough in just the entrepreneurial world. And I think most people should bootstrap. And I think you scale more strategically bootstrapping rather than getting outside funding and hiring
That's right.
folks.
I've seen a lot of companies ruined by bringing in a lot of money, because then
Which
they're
is
not
so why.
strategic. they're not careful about how they spend money. Yeah, I mean, there are examples we could point to. Um, so it's much better to kind of start limiting the amount of funds that you have to be capital efficient, as the investors like to say. Um, that forces you to make trade offs early on and to be judicious about where you spend your time and energy.
Just last question, Chris. What excites you most just today about B2C?
I think we're at an interesting time because of artificial intelligence. The tech community is constantly looking for the next wave of growth. And, you know, the biggest example, well, first there was the internet in general in the late 90s. Then there was mobile with, especially with the launch of the iPhone in 2007 and onwards. And since then, everyone's been chasing like the next wave. And now it seems like artificial intelligence is that wave. Prior to this, it was virtual reality and crypto, or, Web3. Those are still, some people are still pursuing those paths, but artificial intelligence appears to be this next wave. And I think it probably will be. And with each wave, you see kind of uh, a new group of companies being built, a new group of services being developed. And we're just starting to see that. For certain, OpenAI has raised so much money, they're going to have to build applications. So it'll be interesting to see what they build, but also interesting to see what third party companies that are maybe building on those foundational models build. Um, that remains to be seen. I think the idea of kind of bespoke creations is interesting to me. If you can if you can use artificial intelligence to kind of create anything that you have in your head, then can that translate into a product that can then be manufactured? And that product could be something as simple as a t-shirt, but it could be something more complex than that. I mean, it'll be interesting to see where things go as this plays out.
And and I apologize. I just have one more question out of that. Just what do you think the future of the work? What do you think the future of work looks like with the boom of AI?
Well, my hope is that it will be a large productivity gain for us and not just a way to cut the number of jobs that are being created. I mean, honestly, my kids and the kids I talk to in college are scared to death about all these white collar jobs kind of going away. And there have been many pronouncements about that. Also, companies saying it, just outright saying it. We're using AI to cut the number of people that we hire. But my hope is that with time, um, AI can be used as a productivity tool. That means that so much more work gets done, and increases in productivity really drive increases in GDP per capita in the past. And so that's my ardent hope. We'll see if that happens or not. But my hope is that we can all use AI to get rid of the um, sort of annoying parts, the administrative parts of our jobs that don't take up a lot of creative energy, but just take up time. So that's my hope. But we'll see. We'll see where it goes.
So, well, Chris, I think this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate you for being a guest on the Gildre Spotlight podcast. Uh, just one last thing: is there any kind of things that you want to share with our audience?
Well, I'll just put a plug in for my consulting business. It's at trefo.com, trefo.com. If I can be helpful to CEOs out there, especially ones that are trying to scale their businesses. Most of my experience is in businesses with over 100 employees trying to get to that 1,000 employee level. Um, that's the type of work that I do.
Got it. I'll put all that information in the show notes. Chris, I really appreciate you for being a fantastic guest on the Gildre Spotlight podcast.
Yeah. Thank you, Taiga. And thank you for having me as a guest.